Hello, it is Volshock. I'm going to do a quick replay review for Mogus. It sounded like kind of the start of your build was the biggest issue. So you're on TarTar Steppes. This is a map that you traditionally, we can talk about the map first, and I'll kind of look at your base things, and then I'll give final comments at the end. But this is a map that has a ton of E reclaim, right? Doesn't have metal reclaim, but it has like 320 E reclaim, which means that you're incentivized to go bots. It's also a map that we traditionally play in 8v8. So if you're going to play it in 5s, it's going to have a lot more open room, which means that your unit choice is going to change a lot, as opposed to just trying to fight in a narrow lane. You're fighting in a much larger lane, which means that while you might traditionally go like, say, rocket bot or like whistler or something, you're going to need units that are faster to fight on it. Other important part is obviously the tar. If you look in the bottom left, right down there, tanks move at 75, bots move at 85. So it is one of the maps where, especially when it's open like this, you can do some great run bys where you might like send troops kind of like this. And if there's vehicles here and they try to chase, they might come up and then get slowed down when they're running through there, and then you can sort of hit their backline. In terms of placements, I feel like this is a vastly superior placement than to what you guys did. I'm not 100% sure why you did all of this. I guess maybe you wanted your 2OS in the middle to be a little bit more protected, but I think it would make way more sense if this guy was down here so that you have a relatively good lane to push. He has a relatively good lane to push, right? It's like this guy has the smallest lane to push, but he's surrounded by other competent players. But I mean, it is what it is, right? You can't control your teammates. Regardless, other things like great carry spots in this map are the edges, because you can do really good bombing runs that kind of like come like this and kill all the E production, because normally people build wind in back and there's all the mexes. You can also spider down the bottom, and then there's the geos. Where are they? There's these geos here. So geo, which are awesome, and then the mid geos too, which likewise are super beneficial. So looks like we are going to go 2 max. What's going on here? All right, so you are going to go 2 max into bot lab. I don't hate it. This is a super rich map, so if you start 2 max, I think it's completely fine to go bots, like eat a bunch of reclaim and then get your other mexes, just because, you know, eventually you can just outscale some V starts, because you can have more kind of constructors running around taking all of these other mexes. Wind is at 8 and it's not going down, so you're gonna wind is going down now. I think on a lot of these, just so that you don't run into the situation, if you're gonna open bots, you might as well drop at least 1 solar early, because to build a bot lab you only need about 65 energy a second, right? And you built 3, but the wind's so low that you're kind of screwed here. If you had just gone like 1 solar or like 2 solars straight into lab, I think it probably would have been better. Okay, and now we're gonna V swap. So, couple of things here. Core vehicles definitely have a place in smaller team games. They're a little bit weaker in a lot of 8v8 or like big team games, just because like there's some issues with them. But you know, like Pounder Wolverine can do well. Brutes are obviously amazing. If you're gonna open like this, I would not go 2 max, because keep in mind bots are really energy demanding, but like bots are cost more energy but lower metal, so you can get away 2 maxing if you're going to do a bot open, right? Like there's a, you know, these are, you know, like a pawn is 48 metal, a tick is 17, right? Their cons are 110. But for you, you know, like these are going to be more expensive as you're trying to make them, so you're going to end up running out of metal if you're only going to do a 2 max open. Like the lab is more expensive, the units are more expensive. So if you do want to open vehicles, I would say do a 3 max or even a 4 max open. And a 3 max open probably ideally would just be all 3 maxes, and then whoops, and then solar, maybe one wind into VLAB. Alternatively, if you want to giga greed it, you can do like the 2 wind, 4 mechs. So you would go like wind, and then max, and then either like 2 more wind to finish it off or 1 solar into lab. But if you're going to 4max, you always want to drop like the 2 wind first, just because you're going to need the E production to carry you through building all of those other mexes, but that'll maximize your metal production. There's not like a right or a wrong way per se. Like you'll see really good players open 4max, you'll see good players open 3max, you'll see good players open 2max. The only real issue with it here is that 2max vehicle is going to be really hard to do well, especially because you had to build a solar, so you're not going to have a ton of metal, and you need that metal to like build the next solar when the wind is low, among other things. All right, we don't have anything queued, so whenever you're building these core labs, the core T21 labs take like a decade and a half to open. So always queue up something next to it. Like you could either queue up, the wind isn't bad, so you could probably queue up like either a solar, or you could queue up, you could queue up a windmill, right? And then just shift queue it so that as soon as it's done, your commander starts building. And then once this starts making it, then your commander can boost that unit until you run out of energy. And then once you're out of energy, you can go back and keep boosting whatever the E generation building is. But like if you look at how long this takes, it takes a long time. And you didn't even have it shift queued. If you do want your comm to boost immediately after, you can hold shift and then hit guard, which is O right here, and then just click. And then as soon as he builds it, he'll immediately boost it. So we're going to get out our first. All right. So here's our first problem. You're e-stalling, right? And if you look, you're trying to spend, or you're currently spending 206 energy a second. You're making 72. So you're putting all this BP into this con, and it's doing nothing because you don't have the energy to actually do anything with it, right? BP is only useful if there are resources for it. In this situation, because you don't have the E, the best thing to do is literally just either drop a solar or just start dropping wind to help kind of fix your problem. In its current situation, there's no reason for you to boost this. He's not doing anything. Your time is better spent with your commander just building alternative sources of energy, because right now you're just stalling really, really bad. Okay. So what's your queue? Where's your commander going? Right. So we went 1 con into 3 rascal, which I don't hate, but also, okay, I take it back. I'm not the biggest fan of it. So this is a relatively large map, right? And you want to first, and it's a 5v5. You need a ton of cons and a ton of fast units to take all of this. So I would say you could probably open like 2, if your commander's in base and you have all these mexes, you could probably open like 2 or 3 con. And you want the initial starting cons anyway, because you've had E problems this whole time, right? Every V con is 10 energy a second. If your bot cons, they're 8 energy a second, but like you're at 80. Imagine if you built 3 constructors right now, or 2 more constructors, you'd go from 80 to 100, which is actually a pretty substantial increase for you, right? And you want these cons because you're going to need build power on your lab. You're going to need energy generation, and you need these cons to help you expand and scale E. Like ideally, this guy should probably take these and then go all the way back here. And then once he's back here, you just want to be wind farming with him, right? Like this dude can spend his entire game in the back building windmills, and that's like a perfect allotment of his time. And you don't have to micro him, right? Just do a stupidly long queue like that, and then he'll get you a bunch of metal and do that. So first problem is, I would say build more cons, be a little bit greedier. But second, you're about to leave your lab with no BP, and your commander is walking forward. So you're not going to be able to build anything aside from rovers, and you're just going to start stockpiling metal. So we get out these rovers, And then what are we building next? And we're gonna scout. Okay, so I like the scout. Another caveat, you don't have radar, homie. Super, super important. There's a joke, but Clyrat, who was like one of the highest OS players of all time, I was used to ping people for radar. You always want radar. In this situation, because this is such an open thing, I probably would actually say just drop radar like in your base, like before your commander even leaves. Just drop it like that, because then you're going to know, even if you only see them for a second, you're going to see units that might be wrapping around or units coming like this. And you'll have time to either make units or make LLTs or whatever. But radar is super cheap, right? It costs almost nothing. Just drop a radar before you leave. Alternatively, if you don't want to drop it there, you're heading by like one of the best early radar spots in the game, right? So you build this here, and then you build this here, and then before you keep going, or actually maybe even before you go that, just segue up here, right? You can walk like kind of right up there, and then you can build a high ground radar right here. Where is it? Right there. Look at what that radar sees. That radar basically sees everything that's going to be important to you for the next like 5 minutes. So you could build one in the base if you're worried about more aggression, but also just when your commander's going, drop a bad boy right there and you're good to go. But your comm is going to keep going. I like, right, so have the radar there, but also bar is great because it has incredible quality of life for like queues and control. Whenever you're doing anything like with your commander or anything else, like any constructor, just put a stupidly long queue. Literally, you can just be like, all right, you know, you just hold shift. You're like, all right, take that, take that, take that, take that. And then once you're here, you know, maybe we need solars or maybe we need some LLTs here. And then take this. And then, you know, we want a radar. But like queue up like 20 things because you never know what's going to happen, right? This rascal might come in and you might like have to micro him and have him be like attacking your enemy and running back and doing all this. By having a stupidly long queue on your commander, you just enable yourself to micro, right? Like a lot of people are really used when they come from some other RTSs, they're really used to being like, oh yeah, it's like StarCraft, 9500 APM. I go here and then 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 I do this. And it's like, no, dude, just queue up 20 things and then micro your unit. That's it. That's all you have to do. You don't need to do anything else. And like similar to this guy, right? He's going to build these and then just build that. Just queue all the things, right? Just boom, do that and then queue up like 50 wind. And then you don't need to think about it and you'll be scaling your E economy. Which brings up another point. You always need to be scaling your energy economy. Doubly so on a map like this where you're going to have a ton of metal, because traditionally when people are used to playing in like 8s or some smaller teams, they frequently won't be used to like they are used to the metal they're going to have, so they'll just start stacking metal. So you're going to need someone to take all of these mexes first, but then you're going to need multiple cons to be scaling your E production. Because if you don't, you're going to end up in a situation where you have like, you know, 1,000 metal or 1,500 metal or some ungodly large amount of metal that you never want to have in your bank in T1 just sitting there, and you're going to be E-stalling. And you can't really address it right now because you don't have enough cons, right? You're going to get your second con out now, but you're going to need more, and you're probably also going to need nanos in your base. All right, I like these. So what do we see? We see your opponent is bots. You see that he is core bots. So he's core bots and he is grunts out. Immediately, you're gonna need, you're gonna need incisors, right? You're gonna be able to have the speed of incisors to actually run around and fight his groups of grunts. And you want the tankiness and the damage of incisors so that they can actually win out those fights. So I would say as soon as you see that, I would do a queue of like 3 incisors, 1 rascal, 1 con on repeat or something like that. Because you still are going to want rascals to run through and scout everything, but you're going to need incisors to actually fight across this entire area. And then you still want cons because you always want to be scaling your BP and your energy production. That's like another thing that you see it more in 1v1s, but in something like this where it's really, really rich in terms of like the amount of metal you're going to get, TarTar Steppe is just a super, super metal rich map. it's totally fine to just queue a bunch of cons in your unit queue, right? Like in 1v1s, it's really common. You'll see like 4 or 5 brutes and then 1 vehicle constructor. And it makes sense because it's just like you build some military units and then you build a constructor. And the constructor, if you have factory guard on, he's literally just going to come out and then immediately start boosting your lab, which means that you automatically are just scaling your energy production and your BP, and you don't even need to think about it, right? And so that's another one of those quality of life things where you can just add that and you don't need to worry about it. You can worry about other things. Okay. Let's see what is happening next. So this is what I talked about before. You're just stockpiling metal, you're stockpiling, and you're not burning through all your use. So you're overflowing to your team, which they're happy about because wind is high. But you need BP on this lab. Whenever you're gonna make the decision to walk your commander, you only really ever want to walk your commander in like 3 situations. Number 1 is 0 metal, meaning that your commander was in base and he built whatever 2 solars and the lab, and then he boosted out a con or something, and you're at 0 metal. Then you can walk your commander forward because his BP isn't useful there, right? Number 2 is if you have BP in base. So if you still have metal, but you have like 2 vehicle cons here, right? These are V cons and they're boosting, you don't need your commander's BP, and then your commander can walk forward. So in both of those situations, that's fine. And then on some maps, not this map, but on some maps, there's like a terrain thing that you have to get to first. So like a great example of that is like on Coombe Valley, there are like these islands, and a lot of times you want to buy a transport and then like immediately fly your commander to them. But here, this is just a big open plain. It doesn't really matter when your commander gets to front because he's not going to be able to hold a narrow lane. There's all these other avenues for attack. So this doesn't apply here. This didn't apply here. And this didn't apply here. So your commander should have stayed in base a lot longer so that you actually have the BP before you leave. And now we're spamming wind. And we are expanding forward. Yeah, so see, like, you're manually queuing all these. You don't need to, man. Just double hit X. Hold shift, double hit X, and just take them all. Oh yeah, here we go. I like this. Maybe. Chase him. Get him. Nice. Yes. All right, so this is good. That's awesome. So great little harass. You see the LLT. And then you're gonna micro. So great. Only problem. You have a ton of metal right now, right? And the main reason you have a ton of metal is because you don't have the What? Because you don't have the BP to spend it, or the E production to spend it. Okay, let's talk unit choices really quick. I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but the map and the lane you're in is really going to dictate the units you make, which sounds obvious, but sometimes it's not as obvious as you think. Like, your lane here is something like this. That's like a ton of area to cover, right? So you're gonna need fast units that can respond to raids. Like if this guy sends grunts like this, you can't have whistlers. Whistlers are really only good units if there's an established front. Actually, probably the better way to describe this is think of T1 unit production in 2 phases. The first phase is kind of like expansion, meaning that there's all these empty mexes and there aren't LLTs anywhere. And so as you're expanding and taking all these mexes and moving forward, you're going to need fast units, right? Because you want to cover as much area as possible. You want to be able to fight off raids, or you want to be able to send raids to go like kill mexes, kill cons, right? Which is exactly what you do here. And you see how useful these fast units are, right? He doesn't have anything fast that's chasing you down. So his commander is trying to like chase you, and you're doing a ton of economic damage because these units are fast and they can sneak through all the gaps. And you recognize that on the attack, but then on the defense, you're making a whistler, which is like the slowest T1 in the T1 vehicle unit in the game, right? It's like a whistler can't respond to anything. Like if a whistler is here and a grunt comes like this, by the time your whistler gets back, like your whole base is dead. They're just so slow. So during the first phase, which is expansion, where you're trying to expand to all these mexes, make fast units. And then after your calm kind of gets up to the front right here, then you can swap into units that are actually like frontline fighting units, right? And that's where there's like LLT, 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 LLT. And so your raiding units, your fast units, they can't get through the LLTs. Then you can build things like Wolverines or Lashers. Brutes can kind of occupy both things, but generally speaking, you don't want to start early brute production. You'd much rather have incisors and rascals first. And then sort of as you have a little bit more metal and energy production and everything else, and your holes are kind of more covered, like the gaps in your defenses are more covered, then you can produce more brutes. But at the start of this, like in the first part, fast units then transition into things like brutes, pounders, wolverines, lashers, depending on the situation that you find. Okay, you are about to have a massive E problem. And you have the solution right here. Also, you didn't have a long queue, so things are kind of messed up. But keep in mind, whenever you're in this situation where you have like god-awful E production and a ton of metal, just start dropping basic solars. And you can even drop them with your commander. A basic solar is the only unit in the game, the only building in the game that you get 100% return on, because it costs 0 energy. So even if you're at like minus 10 million plus 0, you can always build a basic solar. You'll never E-stall on them. And because they cost no E, when you eat it, you get all 150 metal back and there's no problems. So like, that's why when you see players, like higher OS players play, they'll never build metal storage in T1 because it's just meaningless. Instead, just build a bunch of basic solars, right? That's your metal storage. And then later, you know, if you need like more E production because it's less efficient and you don't have the metal or something, you can build advanced solars and you can just slowly eat your B solars one by one and take all that metal and put it into the A solar, the advanced solar. But you're quickly running into a situation where you're going to have a ton of metal and you're not going to have enough energy and your economy is going to come grinding to a halt. So when that happens, your commander has like the most BP in the game, right? You can literally, even if it's here, just go like solar, 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 and then defend it with some LLTs, right? You can use the solars as walls against a raid, but then that'll give you an extra 60 energy and that solves your E problems, at least for now. All right, so we talked a little bit about unit choice there. We're talking about how to fix your E problem there. Second, you just need way more cons, my dude, especially in these smaller OS games, or smaller team games, not OS, but smaller team games. You need cons that are just like, they're given an order to just expand through like all of this, you know, and then another one to expand like this, and then another one to expand like this, and then build wind. And it's totally worth it, even if they come up here and they die later, because these mexes are just going to give you so much, right? Like these are 2.4 mexes. That's 5 metal a second. So if he comes up here and takes these, right, and holds it for like a minute and a half, right? Think of how much, like it's like 500 metal. It's like it completely pays for the mexes and that. Actually, that math might be wrong. Hold on. It'd be 90, not 100 seconds, but you get the idea. Anyway, more cons to keep expanding because you need the BP, not only on your lab, but to take other mexes, and you need the E production that they afford, right? You can literally just have them in your queue and you'll be fine. Okay, so you're just APM stalling a little bit here, right? Like you do a ton of great work with these. Oh, why'd you? You know there's a mex here though, right? So a lot of times with rascals and rovers like that, I think there's this thing of like, oh, you know, now they know I'm here, I want to like suicide them in to kill one thing. There's no need to do that there though. Like you saw that there was a con and a mex here, just run over here and kill that con and kill that mex, and then you don't even need to keep microing them for there. Like run them over here and hide them for a second, go back to your base, queue up a bunch of stuff, And then once you have a big queue coming, then you can come back and go back and raid them. And that's awesome for a bunch of reasons. One, you don't lose your rascals like meaninglessly, you know, for like just one more windmill. You stop his backward expansion here, but also, why doesn't he have units? All right, well, he should have units. And if he had units, his units, instead of being able to come forward and contest you on the front line, his units are going to need to run and chase rascals, which are really fast and really annoying. So instead of having like 5 grunts here, he's going to have 5 grunts running back over here trying to catch you. And even if you just like run your rascals to there and then to there, and then you build stuff and then you come back later and like kill another con, that's just way more value than sort of suiciding him in here. Never try to throw away, especially those early scouting units like that, because not only do you want to get the damage that you see there, you also just want to see his base later, right? Like if you come back a minute later, you can see, okay, like, does he still have a bot lab? Did he eat his lab, which means he probably has a forward lab up here? Or like, does he have BP? You know, like what's his E production? Because like if you get like the later you can get that scouting information, the better, because you have a more holistic understanding of like what he's doing, what he's building, and sort of what you need to do to counter it. Okay. So we are accumulating substantial amounts of metal. We already talked about some solars, my dude. Solar. Yes. Solars and cons will help, right? I think that's literally your biggest issue right now that I see. Yeah, see, like this guy knows what's up. He's not going to keep fighting. He's just kind of running back and then hiding, so they have to chase him. But you should have, yeah, we talked about it. We need cons expanding back there. The unit choice, I'm not the biggest fan of either. All right, we finally get a radar down here, which is dope. I think the high ground radar there would have been good, but hey, radar is radar. Clyrat's happy. You're going to keep expanding. Yeah, this is kind of the issue, right? One of the really scary things about when you start e-stalling is that like you don't need that big of a deficit to completely lock your economy, especially if you don't have e-storage, right? So if you're at like say -175, -150, you'll drain slowly and it's not a problem. But once you hit 0, you're kind of screwed, right? Your economy is just going to completely lock up even harder. And you can, you know, well, you don't have more cons here, but if you had a con here, literally just do this. That's it. That's all you need to do. At least for the start, just drop a bunch of basic solars. That's all you need to do to resolve your issue right here. Now, and be building more constructors, but we talked about that. This goes back to have long queues, right? This dude's just chilling. He could tap that, and then you always want to have a con on the front because you want to be able to build things like nano turrets, construction turrets, right? You also really want to be able to build like jammers on the front as well. One of the more common ways to forward expand is actually one of your early cons is the con who's going to like go and take these. Which is probably an inefficient route. It's probably better if you go like radar. I don't know the actual route. Like you can have one con do that, and then your commander can just straight up walk towards mid. And then your commander can get to the front and, you know, start dropping LLTs and kind of securing mid, and then you can backfill all the mexes with your con. The problem is your commander walked forward and like took all these mexes, right? And now you have all this metal, but you can't spend it because we didn't scale our E production back. Okay. We got some fights here. We're going to keep going forward. So again, same thing, right? Long queues. Different unit choices. Also, you have this on repeat, right? always just put a rascal in. You always want to know what's over here, right? This guy did a bot lab, but the units you make should be, well, unless it's 8v8s, in which case you just make rocket bots. But in most games, you always need to know what your opponent is making, right? So you need just a rascal or two. And even if the rascal just like runs like this and goes in and dies, you still know, okay, he has a bunch of grunts or he has something else. But lashers are units that need like a defensive line to retreat to, right? Normally you need sort of like a huge LLT forest like this, and then your lasher can come out and shoot at their LLTs and then come back. You don't want to just be making lashers on a wide open plane like this, because why would you, right? Like, your tanks are here fighting and your lashers are back here. And if your lashers get collapsed on, they just die. So, okay. But yeah, we need to know what's here. Like, see, these are grunts. You can just tell from like the number and the speed probably. But the problem is, like, you still don't know everything that's here. He could be massing grunts. He could only have like 6 grunts and he could be running T2. You need information. You need to be like pressing him. And if nothing else, like if these two are just like incisors or stouts or brutes, you can just run up and like attack him and then run away. You don't need to commit. You just want to like chip at him and annoy him. And your ally is doing sort of like what you should have done, right? He's tapping all these mexes. And he also, if you look at everyone else, see how like this guy's at 190, you're at 242, blah, blah, blah. This guy's at 426. And yeah, he has some wind, but do you know what else he has? Right, this is probably an excessive number of cons. However, it does demonstrate the point. Does he have some on the front? Yeah. There's one of these. All right. He has 150 E production just off cons. I will say that where he's at now might be a little excessive because his lab is opening up now. So it's actually probably not even that bad, right? But like, this is not a bad thing to do. If you have on a very rich map, like on poverty maps, like DSD, for example, where you only have 6 metal a second, you can't make this many cons. But especially on a wide open metal rich map, you can just spam cons and you. Oh no. And you should. Okay. So, couple of things here. Generally speaking, especially in team games, you never, ever want to make T1 storage. It's just not a thing you want to do. If you're about to if you're about to hit your cap of metal, it means you either need to be spending it, like you need to maybe go T2, or you just need to spam a bunch of brutes, or you need to drop more build power so that you can actually build more units. Or if you have BP, or if you're like, oh, I don't need more units or whatever, then you need to send it to someone who needs metal or who can use the metal. Like this guy, you know, he could potentially use more metal, but you having 1700 metal is like actively negatively hurting, or like is actively hurting your team. Because if that metal was, well, you guys are all kind of stalling here, but like if someone else can use that metal, you should send it. Because if you think about like 1700 metal, right? Even like put it into brutes, put it into stouts, like that's what, not 15 incisors, but like 14, 15 incisors. It's a lot of incisors, right? Imagine if like 14 incisors just came running through. 14 incisors will kill this base 100%. They could just run like this and then just kill him and you'd be completely fine. So never build this in T1. The only time you're going to build it, generally speaking, is if you're going to go T2 and you want to stockpile the metal for it. And even then, you don't even build it for that. Normally what you do is you start the lab and you burn through all the metal you have, and then you eat your T1 lab. If you do want to store more metal for later, you use basic solars, right? That's what we talked about before. Think about this. This is what, 340 metal. So let's just call it 600 metal between the two of these, right? It's 680, but just 600. These are 150. So you could have these and just be stockpiling metal for next game. Or you could have 4 basic solars and get an extra 80 energy a second, which would be awesome. So anyway, that's that. E-production or e-storage, completely fine. Most games you'll only need one, especially on like on wind maps, it's nice, but you do want e-storage for like a lot of things. The 2 main things you'll need it for are when you're making expensive buildings. For example, like A solars, core A solars are 4,000 energy. You don't have 4,000 energy banked, right? So when you try to build a core A solar, you're just going to e-stall into oblivion, and it's going to really suck when you're trying to like burst all your BP onto it. But if you have an e-store, then you can have, because the e-store is 6k E, you'll just have that energy banked, and then you can just drop, 1 or 2, drop 1 or drop 2 or whatever. And then that'll give you the buffer to actually build the energy producing buildings. The other thing that's really important is the geo, because geos are 13k. ARM geos are 13k. I don't know what core ones are. Hold on. Yeah, core ones are also 13,000 E. So same principle applies. Which means we can either, you can build one for that. And then the other thing you need it for is complay, right? Because D-Gun is 500 energy and Cloak is 100 if you're standing still, 1,000 if you're moving. Oh yeah, this right here, this is A+. It took a little bit to get there, but this is what we want to see. Good work. Yeah, so sometimes people will build 2 so that you can like calm walk and cloak longer, but generally speaking, you only need 1. But never build those unless you're like doing a very specific eco build. See how you're e-stalling trying to build nanos? Nanos are 3,200 energy and they don't produce any energy, but cons are 2,100 and they produce 10 energy. And so that's one of the arguments of why you would actually want to have a bunch more cons in a situation like this, because, well, 1, you want them to be expanding to all these different things. But then 2, just like this guy's doing down here, you want all this energy production, right? Even just the ones in his, well, those aren't his. Even just the ones in his base is 100 extra energy a second, right? And he's not e-stalling. You are e-stalling. I'm pretty sure if you had an extra 100, yeah, if you had an extra 100, you wouldn't be e-stalling. You're e-stalling right now because you're trying to make these nanos. So you can totally make nanos later, but first just make a few more cons. And then like once these are done and you have the BP here, just do this. You can just drop a bunch of B solars. Why do you have 3k metal? What? Okay. So you see the attack coming. Your commander is gonna come up. You have this here. I probably, you could have had like a longer queue here and just like built even more LLTs. A lot of times when I build LLTs, I'll do an LLT creep that kind of goes like that so that I'm moving forward and I'm kind of moving up. The diagonal LLT creep, I think, is superior to just the straight like vertical or like the straight horizontal, depending on the lane. So you see this, you're going to back up a little bit. And now we can just spam units because we've got the BP. All right. You built all this BP, right? Your team are homies and they're overflowing, like 4 people are overflowing into you right now. You're using 800 energy a second. You're producing 300. This is not sustainable, my friend. So that just goes back to, you really want to try to highlight your early economy. I'm not sure how much more I'll watch because I feel like the game's kind of getting a little bit out of hand here. So we got lashers. All right, so you see these going up. So this is a great example of why you don't want to go lasher early, right? You can't catch these. These can literally like go like this and you can't catch them here with your lashers. It's gonna pause for some unknown reason. All right, there we go. So like if you have incisors, your incisors can catch those. Rascals don't fight well on the grounds, but like incisors can catch those. Your lashers can't. So now you're kind of like hoping that your teammate who does have incisors can come down and help you and kind of bail you out. The other problem is that even if you have lashers here, this like grunts will just murder lashers. Lashers need like pounders or something else in front of them. If there isn't something like that in front of them, the lashers are just going to get overwhelmed by grunts. Lashers have awful DPS, right? They're only really useful if you can kind of kite in and out of pork or defensive units. And that is why if you scouted him like with a rascal and you saw, oh, he has a bunch of grunts, then you could have made a pounder. And instead of just chilling here, you could have been attacking and you could have had a pounder, and your pounder would have done what this guy's pounder did, which is kill 6 grunts with 1 shot, right? That just goes back to scouting and then to unit choices. Pounders are pretty slow though, so it's one of those things where you'd still want incisors early, but you could definitely have some pounders there. All right, and now we got a few more. Where's our E-scaling? Oh, okay. One more thing here. Whenever you're building wind farms, you can't build them this close together. You either need to do them in rows of 2, like that, or if you want them in a grid, you need to space them with Z and X. So Z makes the grid bigger, X makes it smaller, so you just need a spacing of 1. If you do them like this, as soon as any 3 die, they'll chain and they'll just kill the entire stack. So you have all the room on the map. You're not constrained by anything. Just spread them out. This guy's just chilling, but this goes back to have long queues, right? You could have queued that, and then you can literally just go like this. Boom. And he'll just spend the rest of the game scaling your E economy, which is what you need. I would say so your ally kind of builds you out there, which is nice. You are real short on units. You have all this metal. You could just go T2 here. Your enemy isn't really attacking you. Well, all right, let me rephrase this. In an optimal game, or like in a higher OS game, this guy's going to be attacking you the whole time, and you're going to have to be making units. Because he isn't, and he just donated like his entire army up here, you can totally just eat this lab and immediately go T2. You already have way more metal than you need, right? And oh, you're going to drop T2. Okay, perfect. But don't, in these smaller games, don't build lashers. They're, please. That's ambitious. All right. This you just threw away a huge army, and you've got you've got a massive army here. Just go into that. This is one of those things where like I really support the rascal in the queue, because then like when you're on the front here, you're like, oh, there's a rascal right here, and then you just run the rascal in like this, and yeah, maybe he dies like right here, but what does he see? Or maybe he dies like right here, right? He sees there's like nothing here. There's literally nothing in front of you. Where's his command? His commander's not even in the front line yet, right? So you literally will just kill him if you just walk at him with, you could probably just just F click all of your units like this, and you would have killed him. But we weren't aggressive, and that's what happens. All right, so now we're gonna go T2. Oh, these are slaved. Yeah, don't do that. You wanna, all your nanos are slave to this lab. You want to dump all your metal into here, and you just want to eat it later, because, well, there's a couple things here. One, you're e-stalling again, right? And so when you're trying to build T1 units and a T2 lab at the same time, it's just not sustainable. This lab is going to take forever. You have the metal for it, you just don't have the E, because we haven't really been scaling our E economy. You need to immediately stop this, right? Just stop building these. You should probably eat the lab, but if nothing else, just right? And then these guys can immediately boost that, and it'll help fix your E economy. But for now, it's not where we're at. All right, so we got a little skirmishing. Right, okay. So I'm probably going to stop it there because I feel like optimal play beyond this is going to be like really situationally specific and probably won't help you improve that much. In terms of an overview, right, of like what should you do to improve, I think there's basically two. Well, let's talk the macro side first. If you're in a really narrow lane, like if there are 8 players, actually, well, let's do this instead. Let's just go first with your start. On a map that has a bunch of reclaim like this and that's really open, it makes more sense to go bots. You had E problems all game. There's hundreds of thousands of trees just waiting to be reclaimed, right? I think it's like 320. If you had started with say 2 res bots and the res bots just ate all those trees, you probably wouldn't have had E issues for most of the game. You opened 2 mechs. If you do want to go vehicles instead of going bots on this map, I think you need to 3 mechs or even 4 mechs. If you 4 mechs, you want to go like 2 wind and then mechs, and then maybe solar into lab, or maybe more wind there or something. But you had a huge issue early on where it was like, you didn't have enough metal to spam solars to fix your energy because you went vehicles. Second, so the first is like that initial start, I would have gone bots, I would go vehicles instead. You really need to work on 2 things. I think the 2 main things are expanding. Specifically, you need to go out and take mexes in a game like this. And then second, you need to work on scaling E. And E scaling doesn't need to be complicated or even thought about. Literally, the easiest way to do it is like, you might send your first con forward. Your second con, if you had all of those, your second con can just like go 1, 2, 3, and then you can just queue up like 50 windmills, and he'll spend the whole game queuing up wind. Don't be afraid on a map like this to just spam wind. Like you might have 1 or 2 or even 3 cons building wind for you. In terms of like the actual cost, wind is it's like 2 metal a second. I think for core it's 2.1, maybe 2.4. I guess maybe it's 2.4, and then for ARM it's 2. Is everyone core? For ARM it's 1.9. I think for core it should be 2.1, and then for ARM it's 1.0. But just think about it in terms of like every con that you have building wind is going to be spending around 2 metal a second. So like if you look, you're at 30 metal a second. Like having 1 con spamming wind isn't even 10% of your income at that point, right? But you can kind of use that as a basis on a wind map to be like, okay, how much of my economy do I want committed into wind, and like how many cons can I have building? I think you could probably have 2 or 3 cons just spamming wind in back here, right? All of that. So you want to scale your E economy, and then you also want to expand. And the easiest way to expand is just to do exactly what this guy did. Make a bunch of cons and just have the cons run through and cap all the mexes. That's it. There's nothing complicated about it. If you want to make it like a little bit more safe, you could do sort of like like maybe max, and then like you could throw an LLT and an LLT and then max, and then LLT or something. But like, just have some of these cons just expand, just queue up like all the mexes, and you can have a couple incisors or something guarding them, right? But you need to be scaling your E economy, and you need to be expanding to every free and available mex. On a map like this, you basically never want to make energy converters. You shouldn't need to. There are so many mexes that like, these are just pointless, right? If anything, they're kind of damaging to your own economy because you want all that energy, right? You should have more than enough mexes to just spam units out. Like this guy isn't even T2. Oh, he is T2 now, but he doesn't have T2 mexes, but like he's in like 40 metal a second just because he took all these mexes. So he can make almost anything he wants at this point. And when he starts upping it to T2, he'll be even better. You e-stalled like for, I don't know, 7 out of 10 minutes or something, 8 out of 10 minutes. All you need to do instead of building these is just queue up solar. Just solar. And then later on, if you need the metal, or like if you decide, oh yeah, like, you know, you're like, oh, I want to transition into advanced solars, you can start building them, and then you can just eat your basic solars, right? If you hit E and then hold Alt and click on a building and then area drag out, you'll like reclaim all of it. But this has been like the story of the game, where you're floating some insane amount of metal, but you're just E-stalled. And all you needed to do was just like have wind production in back. And then when you got a big burst of metal, just drop solars. So I'd say in terms of like, if you focus on nothing else, just focus on that. Focus on taking every available mechs and scaling your E. And I think you'll vastly improve. The second minor thing is going to be like unit composition and aggression. So like I said before, right? Think of T1 as sort of dual phased. The first phase is expansion, where you're going out. And normally in expansion, you're going to need to cover like a huge area of the map, right? And because you need to cover a huge area of the map, you want to start off with incisors and rascals so that you can, you know, respond and attack and raid and do all those things. Once you're on the front, and like the enemy army is sitting here, then it makes sense to go stouts, or maybe a couple Wolverines to chip at something, but, or sorry, not stouts, brutes. Lashers, you only really want to build in like a game like this if you think there's going to be air, but they're just not, because they're so slow. It's so hard to fight effectively with them. Even if he just went like this, your lashers will like spend the whole time chasing. Your brutes can probably get there and intercept and fight, but like these lashers are just going to be dead weight. And what's more concerning is that if the brutes run up and they chase something else, and then like a second army engages into the lashers, they're so fragile that they just melt to anything that wants to fight them. So yeah, those are the two big things. Basically, work on your macro and then work on your unit composition. I think you had pretty good micro, like when you were like attacking stuff over here, but your biggest issue was literally just you e-stalled for 90% of the game. And I think if you had fixed that, you would have had the units and you totally would have been able to do a lot more. I'm going to stop it there at 10 minutes just because this is already super long and I think I've just repeated myself a lot. But yeah, hope it was helpful and have a good one.